in response to the sex-scandalized Democratic presidency of Bill Clinton during the 1990s, Republicans were back in power during the early 21st century. However, the internet bubble burst and 9/11 happened. Stocks plunged, unemployment raged, and terrorism threatened the world. In an effort to ensure national security, the United States went to war with Afghanistan and Iraq. Environmental concerns intensified as gas prices went through the roof, and evidence of global warming continued to surface. The early recession of the 1990s was counterreacted by a gratuity of lending. I mentioned a little earlier, when we first started the lecture on the time period of the later 20th century contemporary times, that lending boom led to the housing market shooting up like a rocket to Mars. That all came to a dangerous and gut-wrenching halt when markets completely seized up in the fall of 2008. The housing crisis, the housing bubble burst, and we had all sorts of things happen on Wall Street. Mass drops, and companies just coming to an end, long-standing companies. Companies that had been around since like Bear Stearns in 1923, very big, huge, like one of those too big to fail companies, failed. Too many bad loans had been made, and the chickens were coming home to roost. I.e., or in other words, everyone was collecting from everyone, and there was not enough real money to go around. Too much speculation. Like what I had said back in the 1920s happened. People were making loans with not enough credit checking happening. There were futures upon futures upon futures being sold, and they were being parceled out as a way to make them more protected. But in the long run, when they all kind of spiraled down, it affected it spread out the effect over the whole market rather than saving companies that had bought those parceled up, spread out futures. Thus, to add to the New Deal of the 1930s and the Great Society of the 1960s, that was Lyndon B. Johnson's program, the Great Society of the 1960s, and of course the New Deal was FDR's in the 1930s. A new era of socialized programs seems to be unfolding now. Thereafter and now, the U.S. government is bailing out Wall Street left and right. Programs to help people out of crisis were being considered. Socialized health programs, like, we have all the different health exchanges that became popular and were passed as quote-unquote Obamacare. That came about. The U.S. government, of course, now has been implementing many socialized programs, including free COVID check sites and all sorts of COVID testing, that came about with the global pandemic. So that's kind of like a continuation of those kinds of things, and lots of money being offered to businesses that were suffering during the pandemic, and schools and communities. So, we see socialism, be die down and then rear up, and die down and then rear up, according to the public need at the time. So socialized health programs, loan help, tax help, and more are in demand. Gay rights seem more in the public fore than ever before, as states and government wrestle with civil unions and other civil rights, and of course, gay marriage has been passed, and so, of course, we've heard in recent times, talk about what's going to happen next on that front. So these issues seem to be debated still, even now. The U.S. had its first Republican vice presidential candidate, Sarah Palin, She obviously didn't win, but she was the first Republican vice presidential candidate that was a female, and other strong female candidates for the Democrat slot on the presidential ballot, Hillary Clinton. The glass ceiling may not have been totally shattered, but it has, in the words of Hillary Clinton, 18 million cracks in it, quote unquote. 18 million cracks in it. That's the quote. And the long struggle for African American equality and civil rights seems to have culminated in the country's election of its first African American president, Barack Obama. Electing the first African American president before the first female president perhaps parallels African American males receiving the right to vote before females did. Whatever the case, rapid and drastic change still seems to mark this early decade of the burgeoning 21st century, and actually second decade and third decade, right? So here we are now. And I encourage you to read our female authors. They're up next in our lecture. Very interesting to read in this time period. So enjoy.